Hey there, I am Barb Higgins, and this is 1,000 Tiny Steps. In this podcast, I share my stories of love, loss, triumph, and tragedy as I continue to retrace my steps and ponder what led to the death of my daughter Molly. By doing so, I hope to not only help myself, but to bring purpose and possibility to those who listen. If you are ready to laugh, cry, shake your head in disbelief, then tie, buckle, face up, or slip on your shoes and join me as we begin our 1,000 Tiny Steps. Hey everybody, Barb Higgins here, welcoming you to episode 143 of 1,000 Tiny Steps. So 143, that's a fun number for me. 4 plus 3 is 7, times 1 is 7, so it adds up to 7, which is often a big thing in my life. In my coaching history, when we got our bib numbers at cross-country meets and track meets, we'd all try to make them add up to 7. It was fun challenge, mathematically speaking. But 143 is like code for I love you. 143, 1 for I, 4 for love, 3 for you. And back in the day of pagers, when you couldn't leave a voicemail or a recording because answering machines were the way to go, there was no such thing as a voicemail. Cell phones didn't exist. So you had to page people. It's bizarre. I don't even know if I could use a pager anymore. At any rate, this is the I love you episode, which is perfect because I am in such a bad mood right now. I'm really frustrated. I'm utterly overwhelmed. I feel like I'm spinning in circles. I don't know why I decided to do things like throw big fundraising galas. By the time you hear this, the gala will be over. So if it was a flop, we'll have seen a ton about that on social media. And if it was great, you will have seen that too. But right now, today, I'm out of my mind, stressed. Along with that is my driveway being paved, which is fine. And then the back end of my yard being dug up, which is also fine. But I had no inclination that was starting today. And so I had to rush around to try to get things done. And my digger-upper guy thought I was all set and dug up all these things I didn't want dug up. And I had to dig through the dirt and find them. Like it was just a disaster. And Kenny is Kenny and everything else. So it's all fine now and life will be fine. But I'm out of my mind, not okay. And I was not going to record today, but I won't have time tomorrow or Friday. And then I'll be recording late and then I'll be frustrated about that. So I was never going to feel okay. So this is me just being as authentic as I can right now. I'm not okay. And in that big picture, I'm fine. So today's podcast, which is perfect for how I feel today, quite honestly, and perfect for the 143 I love you connection, is about 6 Japanese techniques that I saw it was on an Instagram reel. And it was just by a woman she's a woman with like 10,000 followers. And I think she posts, having a look at her page, she posts all sorts of weird things. But this one stuck out for me. So it was 6 Japanese techniques to help you combat laziness. And I thought, well, laziness. So I've been doing a lot of research on why I'm such a psychological nightmare. And given my childhood and all that I've gone through as an adult, I have a whole list of reasons why I'm completely fine. But one of the connections is laziness, the freeze response being mistaken for laziness. So the freeze response is what you do in a panic situation. So here's a great example. Anytime I was abused, and when I look in my life at times that I have felt off kilter and abused or bullied, I freeze and I become just agreeable. I just want the whole thing to be over. And that's the freeze response. And that's what I did when I was abused as a child. I remember talking to a friend of mine who had similar abuse, but hers didn't last as long as mine did. Didn't go for years and years and years. And I'm like, how did you get it to stop? And she said, I just told him to cut it the fuck out. And I remember thinking like, that's all I had to do was just say stop and they would have stopped. Now, I have no idea if my abuse would have stopped. But of course, I made me feel like I was the reason it didn't. Like, some little girl, trying to fight off a big giant relative. At any rate, freeze response is a huge thing for me. So I was drawn to this reel. 6 Japanese techniques to combat laziness, AKA freeze response. I'd heard of them all, and some of them I've talked about before when I did the episodes on Secrets of the Blue Zones, Living to 100. So the first one is Ikigai, and your Ikigai, Ikigai, is your reason for living, something that gives you a sense of purpose. Iki means life or alive, and Gai is effect, result, worth, or fruit. So what in your life gives you worth and bears fruit and makes you feel good about yourself, that sort of thing. And this got me thinking about what is my purpose. Right now, of course, if somebody says, what's your purpose in life? What gets you out of bed every morning? As a mother, you say your children. But then when you have 2 of them that are dead, you think to yourself, okay,
Doesn't seem to matter if that's my purpose for getting out of bed in the morning. They're still dying on me. And I know that sounds harsh, but that's how I feel today. But I got to thinking about my whole life, like Ikigai, like what's my purpose? And as I read up on Ikigai, there are 3 different kinds. So, of course, when you see people, I'm sure all of you have heard of this Japanese term before. But mentors use it and spiritual teachers use it and find your Ikigai, and it's all Zen and beautiful, right? Well, it's a bit more than that. So, activities that generate a feeling of worth can be considered Ikigai, and these activities are not forced. So, running, CrossFit, those are things in my life that were definitely chosen activities for me that I've gotten tremendous value out of, felt good about myself, felt strong. There you go. They are perceived as spontaneous, willfully chosen, right? So you might have a job that you hate and that you get up every day to pay the bills. That isn't your Ikigai necessarily. So your Ikigai can be sources that bring value or meaning. So CrossFit brings value or meaning. And then the existence of CrossFit in my life makes me happy. So I like watching the CrossFit games. I like meeting other people that do CrossFit. So it's sort of a circular relationship with the thing that you do or your reason for being and how it makes you feel, and then how you feel because it's there. So it's like both sides of that coin. So there's social Ikigai, and these would be purposes and dreams and values and meanings that are connected socially. So volunteering, circular activities. So CrossFit could be considered a social Ikigai, but more often than not, it's volunteering at a soup kitchen and your participation in society in a way that helps others. So it would be things like this. Then there's asocial Ikigai or non-social Ikigai. Asocial to me sounds negative, like you can't be social, whereas non-social sounds just a bit more personal. So this would be a purpose or an activity or a thing, an entity that is not directly related to society as a whole. So it could be your faith, it could be your religious beliefs. Yes, you have your community within the religion, but it isn't necessarily connected to society as a whole. There's lots of different religions. Maybe an interfaith council could take religion and make it a social Ikigai, but self-discipline. So then I go back to my running and CrossFit. So both of those activities were incredibly therapeutic for me. When I started running as a teenager, it was the first thing I was really good at. And I met the most amazing people and I loved that I could do it. And so all of it, when I woke up in the morning, the first thing I thought about was running. It was just everything to me. And when I lost my job and was just floundering and running became too painful for me, CrossFit was like the next best thing. It became my everyday focus. I couldn't wait to go to the gym. I couldn't wait to see how well I do, what the workout would be. So that could be sort of my non-social Ikigai. And then there's an antisocial Ikigai. And this resonated with me because it explained in so many ways the behaviors of like Robin and Roy and Amy to a certain extent, actually a big extent, and to Steph, So let me explain it. But I have so many people in my life that are wonderful people in many ways, but are fueled. So it's a basic motivation. So your basic motivation, your reason for living comes from dark emotions, a desire or willingness to hate somebody, a continued desire for revenge. So I just think back to so many conversations I had. Roy and Robin stand out the most because they're the most connected to my Molly experience and all the details that went into her death. But a lot of time I spent with them was listening to them talk about how horrible and hateful other people were. A little bit, Gene Connolly, the principal at the high school when I worked there, he spent a ton of time telling me about people he had no use for. And all of these should be red flags. If somebody's spending all their time saying terrible things about other people, they're probably saying those things about you when you're not around. And when we get into some of my Ikigais, you can see why I'm drawn to those people because I'm so easily sucked into other people's agendas and thinking that I'm helping. Does not make me like innocent or a victim, but it explains a lot of my choices. So that's the full definition of Ikigai. So in looking at my life, which isn't what this podcast is all about, right? My 1,000 tiny steps. So as a child, I would say the main reason I woke up before being abused was I was a child. I had a nice family. Who knew what today would bring? I was curious. It was just like growing up and exploring the world. And I lived in a home that supported all that. But as the abuse went along, survival became a very big Ikigai for me. And I knew that I had to somehow manage to get through each day because there were tasks that needed to be done. which goes into me thinking I have to help everybody and fix everything, that somehow it's my job to maintain balance. And believe me, sometimes that's what got me up in the morning. I put church. It wasn't all the Jesus and the Bible readings that made me love church. It was my community there. I loved the ministers. I loved my friends in youth group and choir. I loved the music in the service. Like the whole experience was important to me. So I loved Sundays and Mondays and Thursdays because those were church days for me. Family was a huge thing, especially when I was like elementary school. I talked last week about, or 2 weeks ago about, having to get my brother and sister ready at such a young age and how hard that was on me. But I do know too that I lost sleep and I thought about them all day, worrying about them like a mother might worry. I worried about their safety. I worried about where they were. There were lots and lots of Saturdays that they were mine all day when they were 2 and 3 and I was 9. And we'd go to the library and we'd, make kitchen forts and living room forts and blanket forts and all. But it was exhausting. And I spent the whole day with a knot in my stomach because I just wanted to make sure they were okay. And then as I got older, running came into it. And so when I could wake up in the morning, all of those things sort of married together. But after my parents divorced and my family situation settled down, and then they remarried, my life was still much calmer and running could be my major ikigai. I have to be honest, relationships and friendships were a huge piece of what got me up and out of bed at those times. And I actually just had an amazing therapy session with Carolina. Going back to 2 things that happened to me when I was 9 turning 10 was the boot story that I talked about a couple of weeks ago with my brother and sister and being late for school and just being so overwhelmed. And the other was Maura, who I wrote about in the book Motherland, and how I found out about her death by reading about it in the newspaper. And those 2 events happening within months from each other. So here's a 9-year-old who at one time is expected to dress and feed and change diapers and get her little brother and sister ready and take them to childcare like a parent and not make my dad late for work and all of that. And on the other hand, I wasn't somehow mature enough to know that my best friend was dying and that I had to read about it in the newspaper. So that created a conflict in me, right? So what I have listed here, all different phases of my life and what was my ikigai. And every phase of my life has family or friends or relationships as an ikigai, as the reason I got out of bed. And it wasn't, oh, yay, I'm going to have a play date. It was more like, oh, I need to see so-and-so because I need to make sure everything's okay. It was like this sort of panic-stricken connection. And I've had it in pretty much every major relationship I've been in. I've had this sense of panic and I'll die if I don't have this person in my life. And, when you look back at some of the ways I learned how to navigate relationships as a child, this makes sense. So when I get into like high school and then college, running is a major ikigai for me. I put God here. And again, I'm not religious, but I always, always, always have believed in God, in some sort of presence or strength that we can't see. And I look around, the main reason I believe it is you wouldn't have this beautiful planet with all this amazing nature and all these people and all of this strife and growth and questions and everything for no reason at all. What did it just appear here? And earth is finite, but time is infinite. There's always a before. And so my God ikigai was always my first conversation in the morning and my last conversation at night with all the big questions that no one could answer. Like one of my biggest questions to God was, okay, so if I go to the end of space, if I get to the end of outer space and there's a wall, what's on the other side of the wall? Or does the wall just keep going forever? But then that means it goes forever. So there's a forever. Like I couldn't wrap my head around things like this. School was a major ikigai for me. I was motivated enough that I wanted to do well. I wanted to graduate with good grades. So I think sometimes, even though school was an obligation for me, I chose to go to school. I wanted to get a college education. So I moved back home after living on my own for a few years because I found that I was drinking and getting into bad habits that wouldn't help with my running or with my life in general. And so I up and left and moved home. And so, of course, I left the bad behavior and the alcohol and the drugs, but I didn't leave me, right? I brought me home. And so when I list the things that were my ikigai in my 20s and early 30s, it was teaching and coaching. So I worked in the school district and I loved that I was back where I started. And I loved that I was working at an elementary school in a tough neighborhood with kids that really needed teachers to believe in them. I had Meg, my friend Meg, who had a lot of psychological disorders. And so I spent hours with her. And there you go, this compulsion, this drive to be somebody's everything. And I got such fulfillment out of that. What was empty in me that I just had to just inhale deeply feelings of of gratitude and aren't I good and relief and fulfillment over someone else's happiness, right? That puts a lot of pressure on myself, but I did. And then my general fitness. So I never wanted to not be fit. I didn't compete in running as much when I moved home. I was working and coaching and, I was separated from Nike a little bit at that time. So always my physical health has been part of my Ikigai because I'm asthmatic and I know that the healthier I am and the more I participate in physical activities, running and now CrossFit, I'm healthier. My lungs are healthier, my body feels better, my mind feels better. So for me, that mind body connection is probably my lifelong Ikigai. When I was little, it was trying to master my body who failed me and I didn't like it. And then I found running and then I loved it. This whole relationship with my body. So then when I got into marriage and being married to Kenny, I tried really hard to consolidate my Ikigai into a white picket fence yard. And it worked okay for a while. But I know one of my biggest things in my marriage was, okay, is this it? So now I'm just married and I just raise these kids. And, every January we do this and every February we do this. And each year is just the same as the last. And that was a huge struggle for me. I thought that I was just becoming complacent in life. And I don't think I had an Ikigai, like a true internal Ikigai. I think all of us as mothers and fathers, as parents and siblings, as teachers and coaches, anyone that works with other people, obviously you have an external drive to move forward and to do good things. Every mother, the reason she gets out of bed is her kids, even if they're loud at 4 a.m, right? That might be why she gets out of bed. But beyond that, there needs to be some sort of internal purposeful Ikigai that's your own. And maybe that's the asocial one, the one that only has to do with you and no one else. And I know that I feel like I lost that for a while early in my marriage to Kenny, or early with the kids, with Molly and Gracie being born. I didn't want to live through them, right? So the idea of marriage is laying on my white picket fence, white house, black shutters, nice neighborhood sort of life. Coaching. So I think what I did was I fueled my Ikigai through my cross-country teams and coaching. And I was coach of the year a couple of times. I had these amazing teams. The thing that brought me the most joy, however, was the bigger the cross-country team, the happier I was, because I was drawing hundreds of girls to running that would never have done so otherwise. And that was something that always made me happy. It wasn't always appreciated. I know my Bo athletic director hated that I had 46 girls on the team. There were only 250 girls in the whole high school. So 1/5 of them were on the team. And that bothered him. He didn't like it. It ended up being part of my demise. And then helping others. So helping others. Jonathan and Johanna when I'm little. Probably my most self-centered time where I was doing the least amount to help others would have been in college, but I was on a full scholarship and running and studying and all that. So it was all about Barb, which I think it should be. And then when I get out of college, helping kids still and others, general fitness, teaching, right? So it's a little bit more socially around. And then everything crashes down. My marriage is in trouble. I lose my job, CrossFit. A lot of that after I was done with the coaching, when I no longer had coaching to get all that self-worth out of, CrossFit became a huge piece of my life and I was good at it right away. And anytime I mastered a new movement or upped my weight on a lift, I was ecstatic. I just felt like I was doing this great thing. I also tap danced during this time. And I think that wasn't a reason I got out of bed, but I think it fueled my happiness and my feeling of self-worth. I have 4 names listed here. I have Roy, Robin, Meg, and then coaching. So those are 4 things that really, and I really should add Amy here. So in Molly and Gracie are little up to the time that Molly dies. So that 11-year period of time. Molly's 2005, Molly's 2, I meet Amy. I really dove into her life. And she represented to me this successful person in a beautiful home, 2 beautiful kids, husband, all of these things that presented an idea of her. And we clicked, we hit it off. I thought we had a lot in common. I've come to find out that that she has a lot in common with anyone that she's friendly with. That sounds snarky, but that's one of her techniques to make sure she keeps you as a friend. But I started to spend ridiculous amounts of time with her. And then the boundaries got crossed and she started dropping the kids off or asking me for help when I was the busy one and she didn't have a full-time job at all. And we started to have this back and forth, but I had this panic about losing her. I feel like sometimes she was the reason I woke up and it wasn't always a good thing. Sometimes it was a negative thing, but it was like my purpose, right? And then it became Roy and helping him and seeing how he'd been hurt. When Megan I thought was being mistreated at the state hospital, I would jump into her life, diving into the charter school to try to save it, knowing in the back of my head that it really wasn't savable, nor was it my job to save it. But there was something about that seemingly selfless act of helping somebody that drives me, that makes me feel like, okay, if I do this, I'm a good person, right? What does this have to do with Ikigai, which sounds so positive? Everything. How are we finding fulfillment? What is our Ikigai? And do we need to rethink what our Ikigai is and perhaps make it something that has less about other people and their effect on you and more about what's inside your heart? That's been a challenge for me. That was part of my conversation with Carolina the other day during my session, was that I told her about someone calling me selfish because I wouldn't go out for coffee with them. I kept canceling, but I was busy with coaching and helping runners and helping this girl with a situation at home. And like all I was doing was helping others. How can I be selfish? But I wasn't matching out. I was giving all to one and not sort of spreading out my giving to everybody. And this particular person was also involved in some of these kids. So this is a pattern for me. I get so swallowed up in whatever the cause is that I stop paying attention to my own causes. My family suffered that with Amy and Roy, and to some extent with Robin. I spent hours with Robin, hours and hours and hours. And then when I went to work at the charter school, it was supposed to be part-time, and it ended up being 60 hours a week. Maybe only 20 were paid. So my Ikigai has been in my mind now for days, trying to figure out what it is. And, I think right now, when I look at right now, it's Molly, her memory, my family, and Jack. But I woke up this morning so frustrated and unhappy. I get out of bed because I have this big gala to plan. And it's not that I don't want to plan it, but I'm just overwhelmed. And I feel sometimes like if I just sat down and stopped, nothing would happen. So I feel all this pressure on myself. Now, every time I ask someone to help, they help. So some of it is me not reaching out. But in how I feel today, in looking at having an Ikigai, what is your purpose? Because if you have a purpose and a reason to get up, your life will be more fulfilling. I don't know. I think my personal Ikigai is CrossFit and my book and telling my story. That gets me up every day so I can continue to share all this. I think sometimes this podcast is a part of my Ikigai because I'm looking at myself on my computer, talking to myself about myself. Dang. But so much of what I say is going to be heard by people that have no idea who I am. And that is even better, right? Having an Ikigai, step number one in not being lazy or being stuck in a freeze response. This episode will have a follow-up blog post where I can write out what I've decided. All right. So the number two thing on this list of 6, number 1 was Ikigai. Number 2 is Kaizen, Kaizen. And that's the basic theory that as life goes on, you can always change for the better. And you should seek to change for the better. Take your experiences on Monday and make Tuesday in some ways a little bit better than Monday was in whatever way that you can. Obviously, not every day can be better than the day before. That's unrealistic. That's the theory behind Kaizen. Continuous improvement relies on small, intricate changes, like 1,000 tiny steps, right? Kai means change. Zen means good. So a change for the good, regular, continuous change. So if I apply Kaizen to my life, then I need to know that I make my bed now. I'm looking at my beautifully made bed. I make it every day. It brings me some sense of contentment now to come into my room with my neatly made bed. I calm down. I don't have a lot of stuff in my room. I spent one whole weekend clearing a lot of junk out of here. It actually really calms me down, right? Kaizen, a teeny thing. I make my bed every day. In all of the areas of my life, I'm supposed to pray every day. I have this morning spiritual practice. My mornings are too unpredictable. And quite honestly, I don't wake up wanting to sit there and reflect and meditate. I want to drink coffee and let my mind be blank for a while. But I pray every day. And every day I try to have some prayers in the morning, some prayers midday, and some prayers in the evening. And sometimes I do all my prayers in the evening because I realize I haven't said any yet. But that's better than going days and days and days without praying. And I've done that as well. I look at myself athletically sometimes. So I know that anytime I go to a gym, I always do some hanging from the bar things. I always do 1 or 2 pull-ups. I always do 1 or 2 toes to bar. I don't do a whole bunch, but if I just do these all the time with regularity, I never lose those movements. And so that's small little change. Even though I'm aging, I'm keeping my body strong and pliable and youthful as much as I can. Kaizen. So that's interesting. And when I look at my whole entire life, I do know that as an asthmatic child, as an abused child, as a healing child who was victorious with running, all of the things in my life really circled back to this philosophy that it's not some big giant change that you try to force on yourself, that it's making good choices every day, good little choices every day. So Kaizen, that's number 2. Number three is pomodoro. And the pomodoro effect actually comes from an Italian for tomato, I guess. I don't know. Something to do with tomatoes, this pomodoro sauce, which is tomato. But basically, it's a time management technique. And it won't work for everything. If you're going to go do a 10-mile run, you can't stop every 25 minutes and rest. I mean, you could, I guess, but you're changing the reason of the run. But it's basically a 25 minutes on, 5 minutes off. You do that for 2 hours, and then you take like a 30-minute break. So I remember vending with Kenny, going to factories, and this alarm would go off, and everybody would stop what they were doing, and they would stand up and they would do these different exercises. And then they'd walk like 2 laps around the room. And I remember saying, "What are they doing?" And Kenny said, "Oh, it's two things. It's to keep them from getting overuse injuries, and they find that work productivity goes up if they have a 5-minute break like that. And during that break, they can also go to the bathroom and that sort of thing." So 25 minutes of work, 5 minutes of rest, 4 times through. So that's 2 hours. And in that 2 hour period, you'd have 20 minutes of rest and an hour and 40 minutes of work. And then you take like a 20-minute to 30-minute break. You get more work done by doing it that way than if you just try to work continually through. So the Pomodoro technique is very clear that it doesn't work for everything. Like there are times when I just want to white tornado the house. So I'm not going to stop in the middle of a project to take a required 5-minute break. If I'm scrubbing the shower and it's like, 80% done and I can finish it in 5 minutes, I'm not going to stop for 5 minutes and then restart. There are times that just doesn't make any sense to me. But there are times like when I'm home having like a computer day, or I have a big task that I could take breaks from, that it makes a lot of sense. And I kind of do this on my own. I don't necessarily time it, but I'll get to a point where I'll say, that's it. And I'll get up off the couch and I'll go move the laundry along, or I'll have a snack, or I'll go to the bathroom, or I'll pick up toys. Like I'll do some physical task that doesn't take any brain power. And then I'll get back to what I'm doing. So Ikigai, your purpose; Kaizen, looking for little ways to implement positive change; Pomodoro, managing your time, giving yourself ample downtime so that you can be more productive in your uptime. Athletically speaking, I call this Jello time. I don't like to necessarily plan days off. I feel like my body tells me when to have them, but I do know that I use this with my athletes, Jello time. So this is where Pomodoro comes for me. If you want Jello, you put hot water in a bowl and you stir powder into it and you stir it all up, and then you put it in the fridge and you leave it alone. It has to stay perfectly still to become Jello. So when I think, what do I want to become? I want to become a CrossFit Games qualifying athlete. There are times I'm going to have to sit still and let my hard work take effect in my body. And it's very, very hard. My friend Pam refuses to take days off. She does stuff every single day. Now, she's stuck at a computer 40, 50 hours a week, all by herself in her house. It's not healthy at all. I feel so bad for companies that are only remote now. It's so unfair to their workers. But I get it. Her social life, her third space is the gym. So I get it. It would be hard for me to take time off either if I didn't live in such a chaotic house. So that's what comes to mind for me, Jello time. And that's how I look at it. When am I giving myself time to become Jello? And time management is one of my worst skills ever. Isn't it funny? I fluff right through that one. So, all right. So after Ikigai, Kaizen, Pomodoro, we have Hara Hachi Bu. Now I've talked about this before as well. And this is just common sense, but we don't follow it. Hara Hachi Bu is you stop eating when you're 80% full, but it's not just that. That's the biggest piece of it. So to begin practicing Hara Hachi Bu, pay attention to when you're eating, pay attention to when you start to feel full, maybe eat until you're full once, and pay attention to when you think you're almost full and when you're actually full, and see how much food that was, and don't eat that part next time. A great way to also try this is to use smaller plates, smaller bowls, smaller servings. You eat small servings. You eat it slowly. You enjoy the food and the texture of the food and the smell. You relax and let it sit for a minute. If you're still rumbly hungry, you eat more, but you don't eat until you're full. You eat until you feel like you're not hungry anymore, not until you're full. So this has the obvious physical benefits. The mental benefits, and I remember for a while when I practiced macrobiotic diet, part of that diet, aside from eating a lot of seaweed and rice, was that you were to sit and eat in silence, and you were to chew your food 20 times or 30 times, and you were to really, really just become one with the food you are eating and enjoy the process. And I eat on the fly. I hoover it down as fast as I can because I've got 500 things to do. I've never been a mindful sort of slow eater, which is probably something I would benefit from attempting, even if it was one meal a week for a while. Do my Kaizen there, right? Low calorie food is better to use. Healthy food, I mean, that's better to eat anyway. But when you look at American diet and you look at our government and how unhealthy they want to make us so that they can claim that they're fixing us, Supersize Me was a movie I showed in my PE classroom class at Concord High School. And it was about this guy that ate McDonald's only for a month. It took him 30 days of eating this way. It took him 2 years to get back to normal from. That's how damaging McDonald's food was. And one of the things he did was if they offered to supersize it, he had to say yes. He never asked, but they would say, would you like us to supersize that? Think about that. Let us give you a supersized serving of really crappy food. Have a nice day. So Hara Hachi Bu works against that philosophy. So not easy to practice in American culture. I remember the first time I went to Europe, I was in high school, and then I went again in my 20s. And, you go to breakfast and they give you this teeny little cup of coffee and this teeny little bread and jelly and butter. And it's like, this is it. But when you drank the coffee, it was quite strong. And when you ate the bread, natural, delicious bread and the fruit and all this, 9 times out of 10, I was fine. I didn't need more, but I would have eaten more if it were in front of me, right? This is something I try to implement on a regular basis. The only sit down meal I actually really eat is supper, Kenny's dinner. And I've taken to eating just one bowl now. I could fill bowls up 3 times. I don't anymore. And if I'm still hungry a half an hour later, I go down and have like an apple or a few bites of yogurt, something to just bring me up to the 80%. And I sleep better. I feel better. The big thing with Hara Hachi Bu is to slow down. And so I just rejoined The Nest, and the book that Karen is having us read is a book about slowing down. Slow down. So that's 4. So it's Ikigai, which is your purpose, Kaizen, small changes each day for the better, pomodoro, time management, Hara Hachi Bu, don't eat until you're stuffed, stop at 80%. The next is Shoshin. I had a hard time finding any information on this. It was interesting. I got websites and volumes on everything else. But the basic philosophy around Shoshin is to keep a beginner's curiosity for all your tasks. So not just like things you go out and do. Like it's fun to be curious every time you go to a coffee shop because you're in a coffee shop, right? Practice curiosity in the mundane tasks, sweeping the floor, moving the laundry along, washing the dishes, brushing your teeth, things that you do every day that can just become mundane time suckers. Yes. Standing at the gas station, filling your tank, going to work, the drive to work, the tasks you do while you're working. If you can employ curiosity on a regular basis in your life, it sort of keeps your life fresh. And what this triggers for me is the use of language. I took a communication class one of my first years of teaching, and it talked about how powerful words are. And the example they gave was, raise your hand if you say, oh my gosh, my head is killing me. Oh my God, my arm is killing me. Oh my God, this workout is killing me. And of course, everyone raised their hands. You're sending a message to your brain that what you're doing is killing you, killing as in taking your life, right? We know logically that we're just saying it's super painful or it's super boring. You're killing me, Smalls, from Sandlot, right? It's a term that we say all the time. But it really got me to thinking about the number of things I say to myself that aren't at all what I mean, but the literal part of my brain is going to take that as fact. Oh, this is killing you. So you're creating this negative effect in your head. This is what Shoshin says to me, that by maintaining curiosity, by looking at everything with open eyes, and all I have to do is watch Jack navigate the world to know that he just looks at the world with open eyes. He doesn't know that there's judgments on things. Little kids just ask questions because they see something and they want to know and they're curious. Until we, the grownups, punish them for what they ask or criticize them or make fun of them, then they have this openness to the world and they'll take information in its purest form. So when I look at my life, I'm one of those people, like I've never in my life, now granted, I've mostly been in long-term relationships, but I know people that have only ever met people with online dating, like internet dating sites. Before it was online, you could log in and go to a dating site. There wasn't like instant online. That didn't come until AOL Instant Messenger and all those things, right? Now you can, there are apps, you can meet somebody and text them and FaceTime them and talk to them before you ever spend any time with them. I can't imagine needing an app to meet somebody because my life is so interesting all the time. I'm in CrossFit gyms. I go to coffee shops. I go to road races. I go to competitions. I wrote a book. I take walks. I talk to people. I can't imagine needing, now I say that, and if Kenny were to, pass away and, or leave or whatever, and I actually thought dating made sense, which it doesn't at all in my life right now, maybe I would feel differently, but I don't think so. I just think the world is full of people right there. However, curiosity, right? Shoshin, keeping an open eye and letting things sort of wash over you as they come. That's hard to do. The older you get, that's hard to do because things can be veiled in cynicism and defensiveness and sadness. I'm going to talk in an episode or 2 about ageism, what it's like to get older and how all of a sudden to realize that, oh, wow, I'm the old person now. They all think I'm stupid and they all think I'm antiquated. And I straddle the line between boomer and Gen X, right? I'm much more allied with Gen X, but my birth date is like the tail end of baby boomer generation. So early to mid 60s was the big change, right? So it's like being on the cusp of Leo. Like I'm right near Leo and Cancer. So I'm like on the cusp of everything, which makes a lot of sense. I don't really fit in anywhere. But as I get older, the Shoshin piece, your curiosity can be tainted by everything that you've seen. But anyway, ageism to come and what it's like to suddenly be the cranky old lady in the room. It makes me laugh. Okay, so we have Ikigai, your purpose. We have Kaizen, your change for the better in little ways. We have pomodoro, time management. We have Hara Hachi Bu, stop eating before you're full. We have Shoshin, stay curious. Stay curious and non-judgmental. Stay enthusiastic and excited. The final one, number 6, is Wabi Sabi, my favorite one to say. So Wabi Sabi actually is a Japanese philosophy around art, and that the most beautiful pieces of art have flaws. Some people look at that and say, oh, it's asymmetrical. Oh, it has a crack. Oh, it doesn't match. Oh, the grains of the wood are opposing. Like to look at something and see that it's not perfect. Wabi Sabi is your ability to look at the imperfections as the generation of the beauty, the generator of the beauty. Like it's beautiful because of the imperfection. And this goes back to kintsugi, where if you have a vase and it breaks and you pour molten gold to hold it back together, now you have these beautiful golden cracks through which the sunlight can come and make the vase far more beautiful broken than it was in one piece. It's sort of that. So how does that translate into life? Well, as I was reading the definitions of Wabi Sabi in terms of art, it talked a lot about asymmetry. And if you cut your face in half and took your right side of your face and flipped it and connected it, so both sides of your face were your right halves, and then you do the same thing with your left halves, you have two completely different faces. This was an experiment I did in a class in college. We had to actually go and get our pictures taken because, you can't just take them on your phone. It was amazing how different the right side of my face is compared to the left. In your life, Wabi Sabi is stop focusing on everything you think that's wrong. Stop focusing on the imperfections. Stop focusing on the flaws, the mistakes, the I wish, the I should have, all of the things that you think of as negative and bad. We are so inclined to focus on those imperfections that we lose sight of all the beauty that can exist within and around the imperfections. So asymmetry and simplicity are qualities that often come in Wabi Sabi. So Wabi means subdued. So sort of like a mellow sort of look at things. And Sabi is rustic, that it doesn't need to be high tech and fancy and schwanky, that it can just be its rustic, natural self, right? So when I think of waking up in the morning and looking in the mirror and seeing my puffy eyes and my wrinkly skin and my little wrinkly neck and, my old lady hands, right? I focus on those things. And what I don't focus on, if I get too wrapped up in how old I look, is the amazing things I can do with my body. I can do pull-ups. I can lift heavy weights. I can do burpees. I can run. I can swim. I can ride a bike. I can climb a tree. There are so many things I can do that I do, imperfections and all. And as a 60-year-old woman, rather than look at how much I don't look like a 40-year-old woman, how about we take what I look like and make that a beautiful 60-year-old woman, right? So I'm using physical beauty because it's where I think in American culture, it's where women often go. But I also look at my house, for example. So I'm doing my yard all over and I'm going to love it. But a little bit of me misses all the imperfections and flaws that existed, one bulldozer ago. But in making my life and my surroundings beautiful, a beautiful new kitchen, a beautiful yard, it will add an air of simplicity, right? An air of, here I am in this beautiful space where I can also now look at other things that are beautiful. So I live in an old home. So the cracks in the walls, to me, they tell a story. The scar on your tummy from where you had your C-section. What a beautiful scar that is. Yeah, it might not look great hanging over a bikini on the beach, but it tells a story of life, right? So it's just the ability to look at imperfections. Now, if you're anything like me, you can list 20 imperfections for one thing you like about yourself, right? So take those 20 imperfections and make them beautiful, right? So I'm angry all the time. Well, I have a big heart and I'm affected by things. Is it an excuse for being angry? No. But if I wasn't sad and if I hadn't suffered and if I hadn't come through the other side, I might not be able to feel anger. And so I just have to look at the anger and find the beauty in it. And maybe that will dissipate the anger. Does that make sense? So those are the 6 things that are supposed to cure laziness. I don't consider myself a lazy person at all, but I do know that when I really get overwhelmed, my initial desire is just to say, fuck it, and lie on the couch and do nothing and just screw it. And I did that today for about a half an hour. I just had to lie there and hurt and be angry and be frustrated. And then I could come up here and record this podcast. The reel that I played for you came from a woman who lives in the Netherlands. Isn't that a coincidence? Good old Amsterdam. Of course. What a connection. And she's called Carola Grunenbaum Stark. It has an umlaut over the U, those two little dots, Grunenbaum Stark. She has like 10,000 followers and her page is beautiful. She's got all sorts of like sayings and quotes and beautiful, beautiful pictures and reels. I'm not sure why she came up. Well, I think I'm public, so they all come up. I don't follow her, but I think I will right now. That's where I found the reel. It's worth listening to just because then you can find those names and what they mean. But that was it. I needed this today. I needed to step out of the fact that I'm afraid nobody will come to the gala. It's not going to be pretty. I'm not going to have everything done. Why do I have to do this? Why did I do this to myself? All the negative thoughts. I can just take a break, right? I can enjoy my water bottle full of water. I can look outside and see how beautiful my dug up yard is and what the final project will be. I can eat mindfully and enjoy taking a break, right? The biggest thing for me, though, is to really look at my Ikigai and what are my purposes and are they healthy purposes? And do I have an Ikigai that is not antisocial to me or asocial to me? I don't think people who spend their whole life blaming all their problems on other people and saying horrible things about other people are really honoring their Ikigai, right? And who knows what their lives were like that made them that way. But I do think it's more convoluted than I get up out of bed every day because, ... So we're heading into summer. We're heading into June, which is track camp, which will make me very happy. And then just all the nice weather. I'll actually have a yard to enjoy and a kitchen that will be done. Knock on wood. So anyway, I hope you got something out of today. I just hope you can figure out what's your Ikigai and why does it make you happy? Be good to someone else today. Do something nice for someone. Send a nice thought someone's way. Put a smiley face or a heart or a little care emoji on a status, right? Then put a care emoji on your heart. Be good to yourself. And as always, have a good day, everybody.
Hey, thanks for listening and supporting the podcast. Feel free to leave a review and share my stories with your friends. Please reach out with your own stories as I love connecting with my listeners. If you would like to get to know Molly, head over to mollybfoundation.org to see what she is all about. If you want to see what I'm up to next, you can find me on Instagram at Barb_444, on Facebook as Barb Higgins, and at my website, 1000tinysteps.com. And while you're there, sign up for my newsletter, a weekly way to find out what's up in the life of Barb Higgins.